I am Angela Williams. I am with Huggins Insurance, and I will be moderating these yahoos up here today. I thankful to be here. It's a great day. Spring is sprung, I think, and thanks for all coming. So everyone up here, Chris, Trevor, Aaron, Paige, and Nick, you'll have about a minute to do self-introductions, and I don't want to cut you off, so stick to it. Chris, we'll start with you.
Okay, I'm Chris Hoy. I'm the mayor of Salem. How'd I do?
That's it?
What else do you want to know?
Well, what's your sign? I mean,
I'm a Cancer.
do you have any hobbies?
I do.
What are your hobbies?
Photography, roses. I grow roses. Yeah, I don't know. I've got 2 dogs also that Lacey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Take it. I'll take it. Trevor?
Hi, everybody. I know most everyone already. My name's Trevor Womack. I'm the chief of police here in Salem. It's been about 3.5 years for me so far, feeling much more settled. We got some big issues and challenges, but we got some positive things happening too. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Perfect.
I'm Aaron Felton. I'm the district attorney in Polk County, and I've been district attorney, since 2013, but I've been a deputy. I was September 23rd, 1999 when I started in that office. So, that's the greatest job I can think of doing. And I just want it's Child Abuse Awareness Month. That's what the ribbon is for. So talk about that too, if you want.
I'm Paige Clarkson. I'm the district attorney of Marion County. Interesting fact, I'm a mom. I have 4 children who are all emerging adults now, but that didn't stop me from yelling at my 15-year-old for stealing the dryer this morning when I was supposed to be cleaning my towels. And that she just threw one clothing item in the dryer. So efficient use of energy, water, all the things.
Yep.
So that's how I roll early in the morning. And but I am privileged to be the district attorney of Marion County, and I'm thankful that you all asked me here today. Thanks.
Wow.
I know, that's a lot. So early.
Good morning, my name is Nick Hunter. I'm the Marion County Sheriff. I get to work closely with Paige, so those stories are often coming out, and so I'm always entertained. Happy to be here, happy to be part of this conversation. I know Chief Womack and I have had several conversations about what this looks like for you all, what this looks like for the community. And so this has been the big point, has been engagement. So I'm happy to be here this morning and see what we can do.
Perfect. You did great. You all get an A. Each person will have about 10 minutes. There's a lot of content that they're going to be talking about. And I love this conversation this morning, just off the heels of State of the County yesterday. Who went to that yesterday? Good job. Good job. That was a lot of information, some interesting information. And so folks up here, they have a lot of responsibility. They do a lot. And so they have, I'm sure, early mornings and late nights. So if at any time you see them, I'm sure they'll take a Starbucks gift card or any of Red Bull.
Can't take those for you. Sorry.
Not even Red Bull. So yeah, so you'll have about 10 minutes each. We're going to start with Chris Hoy.
So just to clarify, we kind of had a different conversation with Tom about timing. I'm just going to do an introduction and turn it over to the chief, and he's going to take the bulk of the time. So
Okay.
I'm not going to take 10 minutes.
All right.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for having us. This is such an important conversation for our community. And Chief Womack and I started having a conversation about community violence well over a year ago. Really kind of, I think in his first interview, we talked about it because he has a background in community violence reduction, Stockton, where we came from. And so we've been having this conversation since the day we met. But it's really become clear over the past year or two that we have sort of a burgeoning problem in specific areas of Salem, especially, although certainly it's our entire community. But we know that focused in East and Northeast Salem is where we have a concentration of community violence. And we know that it's a fairly discrete group of individuals. So that's the good news. We know that it's, kind of a specific location and a specific group of folks who are kind of at risk. And so we talked about what ways that we could address that. And really, this is, our police department is really kind of stretched to their capacity. And we really need to get ahead of this thing And that's really not always the police's role. It's their job, once the police is involved, it's too late. And we really wanted to get ahead of this and start preventing this community violence. So we really wanted to talk about ways to engage with the community to do that. And that's really the whole nexus for the Community Violence Reduction Initiative. It's bringing the community together, making people aware of the information that we have, and then kind of building momentum, building the community capacity to start addressing this issue in these specific areas, to try to engage with these youth, young adults, and sometimes not always young adults, before they get involved and before they decide that turning to some sort of violent crime is really the answer to resolve their disputes. So we know that here in Salem, we have a lot of great organizations, but they don't necessarily have the capacity to get involved in this particular area. And so we wanted to bring the community together to make them aware and to start to develop the capacity of organizations. And if we didn't have somebody that was ready to step up, to potentially create a new organization, if that's what it called for. I'm not sure that's what it'll take, but we don't know yet. So we had we commissioned a study. We called in some, and the chief's going to go into a lot of detail about this, so I'm not going to, but to really analyze the incidents. And so we have a lot of information about that, and he's going to go over that with you. But then when we got the results of that back, we invited the Marion County Commissioners to a joint work session, and we also had the folks from Polk County there as well. And we really just started the conversation at that elected official level to really start to build the awareness. And then we had our first community event a few weeks ago over in East Salem. We really wanted to have it in East and Northeast Salem. So we had it over at the East Salem Community Center. We had a couple of hundred folks there from throughout the community who came out to really start to dive into this. We have hired a facilitator, a gentleman from Oakland, California, who is really a national expert in this work, to help facilitate this conversation. He'll just be engaged during the community convenings. He won't, he's just a consultant. He's not a full-time hire or anything like that. He's just, his role is to help us get this conversation going. So we now have our second session scheduled. It's scheduled for the 19th. And it's going to be at Chemeketa Community College. And we really heard in our first session that we need to be responsive to the community. And so this one's going to be entirely in Spanish and translated to English, as opposed to the other way around. So we're really fortunate to have Angie Hedrick, and in our police, she's going to be taking a key role in that, and some other folks who are going to be helping deliver that message. But we really want our Latino community to feel comfortable, to really hear the information, to really engage at a meaningful level. So we're going to do this next one in Spanish and translate it to English, as opposed to the other way around. We think that'll be a really important way to start to get a whole segment of our community engaged that we have not yet been able to reach. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to the chief, really dive into the.
Great. Thanks, Mayor. Tom, thanks for inviting us in. I'm always happy to talk with this fine group of partners that we have here. We have some strong collaboration in both Marion County and Polk County sides. So I'm proud to just be here with all of you two talking about this issue. And I think the mayor talked about the kickoff meeting we had for Community Violence Reduction Initiative. That's what we're talking about today. We're primarily talking about shootings in our community. That's what this is about. So we had our kickoff meeting, and then I think, Tom, that's kind of what triggered, you were there, right?
I was.
Yeah, so thank you. So thank you for attending. And then we had a conversation, and he asked, to come here. So that's why we're here. So thanks for inviting us into this conversation. And I think that solving a problem like this with shootings in our community, we're under-resourced, but we definitely have resources on the criminal justice system side that we're partnering and collaborating really well. We're doing the stuff that we do with law enforcement well. It's just this other piece that the mayor touched on is, are there community-based resources that we can also develop to kind of come alongside us and help us solve this problem? So that's what these community conversations are about. We're still doing what we do all the time and trying to expand those relationships and partnerships, kind of doubling down on the violence reduction from the criminal justice system side. But I do see huge value in trying to build some community capacity also. So that's what it's about. So I get a chance to kind of cover some of the same stuff that we talked about during the kickoff meeting here with all of you today, and then hopefully look forward to taking questions. For me, that's always the. So again, thanks for having us here. I think obviously the shootings are causing concern for our community. They're causing concern for my officers, business owners and operators. You feel and you see what's going on. We had another murder at Wallace Marine Park early this morning. I've been on the phone all morning. Aaron Felton was out there today too. So this is a problem that's affecting us all the time, and it's drawing more and more of our resources, and it's causing incredible fear and concern in the community, rightly so. So we can't ignore this, and we need to make sure we're taking a whole of community approach. This is all of us in this together. But it's not affecting everybody the same way. And I say this a lot. Because what we know is the shootings they occur all over the city, they do, but they're definitely concentrated. And we know from the data that we've done, they're concentrated more so in Northeast Salem, about a 5 square mile area of our city. It's only 11% of our geography as a city. So it's much more concentrated and focused, which tells us we need to concentrate, focus our efforts in those areas also. So it's not affecting everyone the same way. For some folks in those areas, business operators in those areas, it's very up close and personal. The impacts are profound. And so we want to keep that perspective in mind whenever we're having these conversations. You know, some of us aren't experiencing this the same way as others, and I want to keep those voices and perspectives in mind as we have the conversations and we develop solutions together. The other perspective that I always want to call out are the first responders, the police officers, the sheriff's deputies on both sides of the river. And this is real. They're out there today responding right now. They were there at Bush Pasture Park when that happened. And they've been at every single one. And as violence like this increases in our community, if shootings go up in our community, there's more people with guns quicker to shoot in our community. That also means the risk to our officers is increasing as well. The risk for an officer involved shooting, but even more worrisome to all of us, the risk that an officer, God forbid, will be shot and killed. And just since I've been here, I've only been here for 3.5 years. Just in the past 2 years, every one of us has had a deputy or an officer shot at more than once for me, just in the past 2 years. So we have more people willing to shoot at police and confront police with guns also. So this is a perspective that I want to keep in mind also, the community members that are most affected, but also our officers that are people we send out and ask them to stop this problem and bring order to chaos and confront violence. We need to make sure their voices are part of this equation also. So before I have any conversation about the data, I always bring those two perspectives to mind and keep those at the front of mind. We wanted to understand the problem better. So what I've been talking about for 3 years is violent crime in Salem has been going up for 10 years. I think I've said it to this group before. And so we have a 15-year crime summary on our website. It takes that longer term look at crime in Salem because the long-term trend line is what's important. It's most important, right? Crime goes up and down year to year. You want to see what's our long-term trend. Violent crime has been trending up since 2014. It ticked off last year a little bit. We'll see if that keeps going, but there's a steady upward trend. I think we have right there. That's that trend line you see right there. So, no, that's actually the shootings, I think, right? Or is that the violent crime? Let me see. I can't even see it. That's violent crime. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. So there's a longer report with more information, but that's the concerning one in the report for 15 years. So we knew that violent crime has been trending up for a long time in Salem. It's not a new problem. And also we feel these shootings that are increasing. We wanted to understand that more. So we took a closer look at just shootings. So there's a 5-year analysis on our website now, a gun violence problem analysis. And Angie has some quick 1 or 2 page summaries. Maybe you have one on your desk already. So the first page there is a quick snapshot of all the data in that report. So it's kind of easy. And what we learned from that, just shootings. We're talking about people hit with bullets or killed by bullets and not suicides. These are criminal assaults with guns. People shot or killed with a gun in our community. We looked at every single case for 5 years from 2018 through mid-2023, and that's where we pulled this data from. It's a starting point to build solutions. We have to understand the problem. And so we know areas are high risk, like I talked about. There's a relatively small area in our community where most shootings are happening. 60% of the shootings that we analyzed were some sort of personal dispute over money, romantic interests, some drug-related disputes. It's people angry about all sorts of things that are just quick to use a gun to solve their problem. It's not just one reason that's driving our shooting. It's people in interpersonal conflict that are quick to use guns. We have high-risk individuals too, so it's a relatively smaller group of people. Let's talk about who's involved. These are primarily young adults. It's 60% of the shootings actually involved adults. Sometimes we're quick to talk about the juvenile situation that's going on, which is a real concern. but 60% of the shootings involve young men, 18 to 34. So we got to make sure we include that part of the conversation also, and not just focus on the juvenile component. So 18 to 34, most of them, no surprise, 87% are men. There's primarily men involved in shootings. 51% of the victims are Hispanic. I'm always careful when I say that. We're not labeling any group or individuals. This is about identifying risk. So we know where to direct resources, not just law enforcement resources, community resources. 51% are Hispanic. Juveniles, we took a look at how much juvenile involvement there was. 18% of our shooters, 10% of our victims were under the age of 18. So again, it's not an insignificant number, but it's not the 60% of adults involved, right? So there's a smaller subpopulation of juveniles, but what was concerning there is within the study period, within that 5-year period, the rate of juvenile involvement increased. So it's actually on the rise. It's increasing. It's accelerating. High-risk individuals experiencing homelessness as well. So the murder we had this morning at the park is going to be involving homeless individuals. We took a look at that subpopulation to try to understand. We all know there's been a rise in homelessness. So, how's that playing into our violence dynamic? It's only about 15%. Again, not an insignificant number, but it's a small number, relatively speaking. 15% involved either a victim or a suspect homeless. And my definition of homeless for this report was living in a tent on the street. Sometimes homelessness includes people that are couch surfing or in a shelter. Our definition of homeless for this report is managed, unsheltered people in the streets. 15%. The trend there within that subpopulation there was more towards victimization than offender, though, actually. So a higher number of victims that were homeless than shooters that were homeless. Does that make sense? And we're being more victimized than offending. Also, we looked at gangs and groups. What's happening with gangs in Salem? There's a lot of anecdotes and rumors and thoughts out there about that. We wanted to understand that better. It did appear that about 50%, about half of our shootings involved somebody affiliated with a gang or group in Salem as a victim or a suspect. It doesn't mean that it was a gang on gang conflict. It doesn't mean they're warring with each other and the shooting was driven by a gang dispute. It just means that the victim or the suspect, whatever the dispute was a member or affiliated with a gang. Does that make sense? Okay, so they're higher risk. Obviously, part of a gang, you're higher risk of shooting somebody or being shot. That just makes sense, and the data plays that out. We also know that's a relatively small group of people in Salem. We estimate maybe 200 active gang or group members in our community. That's just our officers doing their best estimate on that. That's like 0.1% of our population. So just like the area is smaller, the number of people at high risk are smaller. It starts to make an unmanageable problem look a little bit more manageable when you focus on the data. And we also know that these are not strangers to the criminal justice system. Most of the time when we have a homicide that occurs, by the time a shooting or a homicide occurs, folks have had multiple contacts with the criminal justice system. They're not strangers. And so we have data there too. About 70% of the victims and suspects had prior contact with law enforcement, criminal history. More than half were previously incarcerated. 60% had already been convicted of a felony before. So what the state is telling us is that we have information, right, about people that are at high risk. And so if we want to try to focus a bit, we kind of know some things that we should probably be focusing on. It also showed this is not an anti-probation or parole data. For me, this is positive because what the data showed that only 23% were on active probation, but 60% had previously been on probation. And so when you're on active supervision, the risk is much lower. So for me, that's screaming at me that we need to reinforce our supervision, our probation and parole, right? So we can actively work to lower risk for folks, whether they're probation or post-prison supervision. So that's a lot of data that I threw out there. There's even more in the report, but that's all kind of summarized on this one-page summary. So for us, this was just a starting point. I mean, it's the problem you're trying to solve. You have to understand the problem itself. So we commissioned this analysis. First step. Step 2 is to begin to have these conversations with our community. So we kicked off the meeting. By the way, we kicked off the meeting on a Wednesday night, and then Thursday we had 3 kids shot at. It's a problem that's happening now that we can't waste time on. And so what we're doing, what I would encourage everyone to do is engage in these conversations, actually. So the mayor mentioned the next meeting for April 19th. It's a Friday evening, actually, at Chemeketa. We'll have at least 3 more larger community meetings during the course of this year. Our focus this year on the community side are these meetings, so we can gather input. The threefold purpose of the meetings, actually. The first one is just to increase awareness of the problem, like I'm doing right now. Let's elevate the awareness of the problem. Number 2, let's conduct what I'm calling a community inventory. So let's just capture all the stakeholders who show up and come to the table and engage with us. Do they have any resources we might be able to bring to bear? So inventory the community. And then 3, get community input, have some facilitated conversations on, especially people that are more closely related to the violence, like people that are affected more closely. What are their thoughts and ideas on how we should approach this problem? So gather input from our community on how we should work on this. We'll synthesize all that in a report at the end of the year. And we'll use that report going into 2025 to kind of help develop that community-based strategy that is right for Salem. So again, this year, we're focused much more on those meetings and that input gathering. The next year will be set to kind of help develop a smart strategy based on everything that we learned this year. In the meantime, so attend a meeting. We're advertising the April 19th one. Tom, I'll get that to you again, but help us echo that messaging. In the meantime, folks at this table right now, we're working hard and we're doing what we do really good. We have nearly 100% clearance rate for our homicides in Salem. I'm super proud of that. It's because I have outstanding detectives, great prosecutors, great partnerships with the county. And so we're just going to keep doing that work. We're working our tails off. It's becoming more busy and challenging, but we're doing that work and we're doing it really well. We're going to try to leverage our partnerships even more, however we can. So we're on some task forces together. We want to try to expand that as best we can. We're going to try to share data and intelligence more than we ever have before on this problem. Leverage technology, for example. So at Salem, we're becoming a hub. There's only one of 2 hubs in Oregon now for ballistics evidence processing. So we're processing shell cases for partner agencies, for our own agencies. Just an example, if a shooting happens, we get a shell casing at a scene, we can analyze that and we can link it up to shootings that happen across the nation, actually. So we'll get a shell casing, and within 48 hours, we'll process that and we'll have a link, let's say, to Seattle. Oh, this gun was used at a shooting in Seattle. So it quickly helps you kind of connect the dots on related shootings and solve crime better and faster that way too. Also, other technology like automated license plate readers. Sometimes that sounds scary because it's almost like Big Brother, but we're enhancing that technology too, where we have our in-car camera systems now capture license plates, photographs of license plates all the time. Goes into a database. It can search those plates for wanted vehicles that have been used in crimes, but it can also be used to solve crimes. For example, if there's a shooting, we're able to look at that database and say which cars were in the area when that shooting occurred. So it helps you solve crimes much faster. We're expanding that technology. We're going to add more cameras to the system and want to partner with our partner agencies so we can share data on the ALPR system as well. So we're leveraging technology as best we can. So we're going to keep doing what we're doing with the resources that we control, even though we're under-resourced, and we can talk about the budget aspect of this. Fun fact, today I have 196 budgeted police officers. How many budgeted police officers did I have in 2018? 196. The number I have today, the same number we had 16 years ago. So it's just a fun fact to remember. So when we talk about the budget,
It's fun.
that we're trying to solve this problem
Fun.
and we're getting
It's a
pulled
fun
in.
fact.
Getting pulled into this. This is much more intense work that we're doing when we talk about violent crime. Retracting from other things that are priorities for all of us, I'm sure. We're having to retract from that so we can invest resources in violent crime. And so when we're saying things like we can't respond to noise complaint anymore, or I don't have anybody to send out to do community engagement at your event, or if you're having thefts or some of the homeless issues we're experiencing, I just don't have people to deal with that. That's why. You can't have an organization that's been flat in growth for 16 years dealing with these kind of challenges and still do everything like we used to. So things are changing and it's becoming more all-consuming for our officers to deal with the shootings. So please attend a meeting, make sure your voice is heard, encourage others that you know, help us get this message out so those voices can be captured and we can use it to help build this community capacity we're thinking about. Just yesterday, DOJ announced the CBIPME grant, I think it's called, right? So there's like 70 or $80 million coming out again from the feds. So when we talk about what I'm thinking about this is I'm laying a foundation here. We can identify some community capacity and resources and we say we have put a little bit of structure in place. They will likely qualify and be competitive for some grant money to support that community-based resource. And so we're laying the foundation, hopefully, for some funding resources also to come into Salem. So I think that's it.
If I could just follow up on that really
Yes.
quickly. So we've also engaged with Congresswoman Salinas on NIDA and the ballistics analysis, and with our federal, we have a federal lobbyist now. So we're really engaged with that. And the chief is positioned as well as a kind of a regional resource. So I think we'll be seeing some federal dollars come in to try to help us. We've really kind of doubled down on that effort. And so I'm really hopeful that we'll see some help there as well.
Right?
Okay.
Good information.
I know. I think that puts me next on the agenda. So I'm going to talk about three things kind of under this umbrella. First, what we see from the DA's office, which is obviously not just right, it's the entire county of Marion. So and Aaron will cover Polk, but I'll let you know kind of what I have been seeing over the past quarter of a century that I have worked with the DA's office. I like to say quarter of a century because it makes it sound like I just stepped off the Titanic. So I like to use that rather than just 25 years. So over 25 years I've been there, and we've definitely seen trends. I want to talk about what we do. When I say we, I mean law enforcement professionals, what we are looking at and what our options are. And finally, what you can do. How do we engage our community to try to help us with this? And really, this is the first step in that. Spoiler alert, it's really sort of understanding where we're at. So first of all, what we see, and like I said, a lot of years at the DA's office. And I can tell you that early on in my career, when there was a firearm case, it was noteworthy. Like we talked about it. When they took a gun off of a guy on the street on a Tuesday night, I would talk about it on Wednesday because it would come into what we call our in custodies, our actual file. And we'd be like, can you believe like this didn't end terribly, right? This guy pulled a gun and the cops took it off of him and everything's great. That is literally just a Tuesday now on any given day. The amount of cases we have coming in where guns are in the mix, maybe not always pulled, maybe not always threatened, but in the possession of people is not even noteworthy anymore. So I have seen that climb over my career, and we certainly are seeing more violence. So not only do people have guns, but their willingness, as the chief said, to introduce them into an actual conflict has gone up. We are seeing that. What I love about this study and what the sheriff is going to talk about and how that's branching out to the whole county is it really just confirms what we already knew, right? It's great to have anecdotal evidence and for me to have a feeling. I got a lot of opinions, but it's really helpful to have the numbers behind that so that we can look at it and be like, yeah, see, I told you, like this is actually happening. It wasn't just in my imagination. And I think it's real to say that we have a gang issue. I know sometimes that term, as Chief Womack said, sometimes people get a little concerned about that term. I will tell you, in my experience, these people identify themselves as part of gangs. It's not really that controversial to them. That's how they identify themselves. It's a source of pride in some of these circles and some of these groups. If they're not groups loosely identified with similar ideals, they actually would like to refer to themselves as gangs. We're seeing that with young men primarily and juveniles. We're seeing an uptick in that. Again, this data just sort of confirmed that for us, that we are having issues with that population. And again, when I started back in 1997 in the DA's office, we had a gang problem. We largely were able to manage a lot of that with the passage of ballot measure 11, which was in 96, right? And ballot measure 11, if you don't know, is sort of mandatory minimums for really violent offenses. We saw a decrease in gang activity following that. And now we're kind of back with these groups of folks that, like I said, really are identifying themselves as gangs. And when you have individuals that identify as a red team versus a blue team, you're going to see escalating violence if one of those particular groups is threatened or perceives themselves as being threatened. So we see that anecdotally. It's being borne out in this study, and that's going to be helpful for us to have it sort of in the full county picture. I don't want to steal the sheriff's thunder, but I think we both kind of, again, know anecdotally what we believe we're going to see in that. I don't think we're going to be surprised, but the numbers are super helpful. The second question then is, what do we do as law enforcement professionals? And I think I've used this analogy with this group before. Got a home builder sitting over here to my right. I always look at it like building a house. You can't do that without the right tools. You cannot do that with primitive rocks and stones, right? You can't do good work and build a safe home if you don't have the right tools. I will tell you from a law enforcement perspective, over the last decade, I personally have seen sort of a systematic taking of some of those tools that we have been used to using to manage violence in our communities. And this comes from policy at the state level. It's not things that we can always control. We're definitely in that building that is literally 2 blocks away from my office. We're definitely there trying to argue for good policy, but it makes a difference. The policy that we have in this state sometimes ties our hands in what we can do, either out on the street with law enforcement professionals or on the back end with what I can charge as crimes, what evidence I have available to me to charge those crimes and prove those crimes, and the sentences I can get at the end of those cases. That is part of our toolbox. And when our toolbox is systematically sort of slowly taken from us, it affects our ability to be effective in how we are managing crime. I'll give you an example though, that I think we all, if you attended State of the County yesterday, I think we're all a little bit hopeful about. I don't think you can do this job for very long and not have hope that things are going to get better. You heard about House Bill 4002. If you didn't hear about it yesterday, you probably know what that is. Ballot Measure 110 and the decriminalization of drugs in this community has had a direct impact. And whether we can tie it causally to violence, I can tell you there's a correlation. Those guns that we're taking off of folks a lot of times are in correlation with people who have large amounts of narcotics and are doing really evil things in our community by preying on vulnerable addicts and selling their wares. Ballot Measure 110, from my perspective, really kind of rolled out a red carpet for drug cartels and drug dealers and said, you know, Oregon was open for business for that. That has complicated our ability to frankly just engage with folks that have drugs. It tied law enforcement's hands to actually work with those individuals in the street because they couldn't even contact them because it wasn't even a crime, right? With House Bill 4002, we have made that a crime again. And again, that's the royal we, the legislative we. But that's a big deal because it puts a tool back in our toolbox to engage with folks out on the street that otherwise might not have been somebody that law enforcement could have contacted. Is it directly causally related to violence? I don't think we can say that from data if you're a statistician, but again, got a lot of opinions as a DA with over a quarter of a century of experience. And so I can tell you that yes, it is at least correlated. And the ability of law enforcement to actually stop cars on the street, on the side of the road, find drugs and guns, that makes a difference. So I have hope that that tool is back in a toolbox where we can engage with these folks again, where otherwise we might not have even found that firearm until it gets used later in a violent event. So the fact that we can engage with drug users or folks with even small amounts of drugs is going to allow police officers to, for example, search incident to arrest. It's a very legal term. It's constitutional that people have a right not to be protected from unreasonable search and seizure. Well, if you're committing a crime like possessing drugs, cops can search for evidence of other crime or that crime. That's a big deal to let cops re-engage like that again. So I have hope that there's a tool back like that. I can tell you, I mentioned briefly about ballot measure 11. Like I said, those are mandatory minimums for really violent offenses. A couple of sessions ago, the legislature made it almost impossible for us to put a juvenile into the ballot measure 11 system or the adult system. Again, I can't tell you that that is a causal connection, but it's a big deal that that juveniles know that they will not be serving long prison sentences for really violent acts. In most circumstances, unless we can prove very specific facts to get somebody into the adult system, if somebody is prosecuted even for a murder at a juvenile level, they're really just going to stay in the juvenile system until they're 25, and then they're going to be back out. And when you're talking about gangs and the gang mentality, that translates into street credibility for a lot of folks. And when you have a very young brain who, if it is not formed and is more interested in being cool and being accepted by a group that you think is really important in your life, that doesn't seem like a big deal to sit in a juvenile system. You're not going to go to prison for long periods of time for really violent acts. Again, can I say that that is causally connected? No, but I believe there's a correlation, and we are seeing it with younger and younger people being more and more violent. And I think it matters when you take tools from prosecutors to actually remove people who need a really longer timeout, right, from the rest of society, so that we can be safer. So when I look at what we can do from a law enforcement perspective, I'm hopeful that we have some more tools, but I still think we need better tools to manage that really young violence issue. When I think about what you can do, like I said, I think you're doing it. I think that the fact that we start to understand that violence that we are seeing by numbers or anecdotally is absolutely connected to so many other challenges we have in our community. Aaron's going to tell you that he probably didn't sleep much last night because there is just a challenge with the homeless population. There is a challenge with gang activity. There is a challenge with youth not having good alternatives and core families and structures that can help them. So when we think as law enforcement professionals about what you can do as a business community, as members of our community, as citizens, I think we first have to do this, understand what we're dealing with. And second, really understand that there are small policy decisions that are made every single day at the local and the state level that affect what we're seeing. And I think it really is incumbent upon all of us, the royal us, to really make our voices heard about what is happening in our communities. And those policies matter, that our public safety matters. And so my ask is, I'll jump on exactly what the chief said, attend these conversations, make your voice heard, and let those people know that are making decisions, what matters to all of us and how to do that best. And so with that, I don't know who, are you next? Are you?
I think I am.
Okay. Did I steal all your stuff?
I don't know if I want to.
Okay. I know. He's got a lot. There's a lot going on this piece of paper. So
This is what my brain looks like, just in case anybody wants to know.
that is what it is. That's true.
So there's always the advantage of going first, right? Because clean slate. I can say whatever I want. Nobody has said something. And then there is the advantage of going second, third, or whatever, because you get to hear what everyone else says and you're like, oh, that's a good idea, but I can expand on that. And then it starts to look like this and you have no idea where to start now because there's so many things that have been said. But I do know. So number one, there's 4 words that come to mind so far as I've listened to the mayor, the chief, and listened to the DA. 4 words that come to mind. And I would play the game, but since we want to keep it in time, we won't play try and guess my words. So first one is collaboration. I appreciate that the chief and the mayor both talked about that to start. I get to see the wonderful DA all the time, but none of these problems are singularly solved. They're not unilateral decisions. So we're not going to get there. We've got to have collaboration. And that's where we're talking about collaboration now from the community. But what does that look like? And why does the community want to collaborate? Well, we get down to word number 2. And word number 2 is safety. So you should feel safe to go walk on your street, your neighborhood, downtown. It doesn't matter. You should feel safe. So I agree with the chief. And when we're looking at the data, we're talking about a small subset right now that is largely involved in this violence. However, that doesn't necessarily take the larger community and make the larger community feel safe. Just because I'm not necessarily involved in it doesn't mean it's not affecting me and really mine. And I'll get to one more word in a second. I got to use other words first. So that safety is a big one. Here's another term that I keep hearing, and I keep hearing it in different ways, but this is what we're talking about. We're talking about stabilization. And when we talk about what Paige just said with ballot measure 110, we talk about destabilization with 110, with the amount of violence we're seeing on the street right now and the gun violence. We're talking about destabilization. When we're talking about the addiction crisis, we're talking about destabilization. We're talking about mental health, destabilization. So what we have to come up with is how, as a community, because most of you have heard me talk about public safety is not law enforcement, public safety is the community. How do we come about to stabilize our community? I spoke at the SOAR graduation last week, and I talked about this. And what we have to understand is when somebody is destabilized, that is when you are uncertain, I made up a word. You are uncertain and you have no confidence. And when you don't have certainty and confidence, that is when we start making decisions from the insula, the midbrain, and we're talking about Daniel Kahneman now, and we're talking about satisficing. And I know Paige is going to start laughing at me because she's been around me too much. But the whole point being that we are making subjective decisions and we are not engaging our higher brain. If we're doing that, We are not putting ourselves in a position for success all the time. But it comes from that destabilization and not feeling certain or confident in my environment, whether it be drugs, mental health, or gun violence. The last one, and I get away from the word arrest, I just want to talk about accountability. We've lost accountability. And Paige brings that up when we're talking about what we've shifted back to ballot measure, or excuse me, House Bill 4002. We're giving accountability back to law enforcement, to the DA's office. We're giving accountability back to the community. You all have been in a position where you've gone down the street and you've convinced yourself now, I don't need to call law enforcement because there's nothing that law enforcement can do about this problem. And so not only are we talking about I don't feel safe, but now we feel like nothing can be done. And so we've got to get back to the point that the community feels like they have a say in the accountability. And ultimately, what's the word? The word is livability. When we talk about safety, accountability, stabilization, and collaboration, we're talking about livability. So these are what I pick up, and this is the way my brain works when I sit here and listen to everybody else talk this morning. But the good thing is, these are all things that we can do. These are all things that we can improve. And when we start every day saying, how do we make today better than yesterday? That's our best place to start. I think that was said actually yesterday during the State of the County. Commissioner Cameron talked about that. Come into the office and in the morning, the first thing you do is say, how can I do something better than I did yesterday? So I stay on subject and don't just start talking. Appreciate very much what the City of Salem did with their GVPA. Great idea, went out and got great data. Now we can start to look at that. What we did immediately was look at the data that they had generated and said, we need more. Because the DA is right. It's anecdotal right now, what I'm going to tell you about the county. But there's this big heat map that the City of Salem can produce. And I can tell you that it doesn't affect me, but that heat map is me. When we talk about Northeast Salem, where a lot of our violence is occurring right now, most of you all know that is a giant interwoven mess of the county and the city. And it's not fair for me to look at the chief and be like, well, hey, this occurred in the city. So I'm sure your person involved never once left the city, never traveled anywhere in the county. And so this is a city problem. And it's just not the way it is. These are absolutely moving. To include, we are having folks coming down from other areas, not just that are Salem local folks. We are talking about Portland. We're talking about down south. We're talking about all of this intermixed. But when we look at that, for me, similar to what the chief did, we've got to have data. If we're going to come to you and say, hey, this is what we want to do, this is why we want to invest these dollars, this is why we want to change and do something different, we need data to drive that. And so luckily the county was in absolute full support. And so we have already finished the contracting. We have started our own GVPA with Lisa and Chris, the same folks that did it for the City of Salem. They're merely now looking at the county, but we didn't just involve the county. We have invited the other police departments to be involved. So Lisa is also reaching out to Woodburn, Hubbard, Jervis, Staten, anywhere that we have those police departments, to include the state police. And we are going to ask them for data. We are going to ask them for that same data set, except for we expanded to 10 years instead of 5. So we're going to look back 10. And then we are also going to focus on those violent crimes, because we can talk about gun violence, but really we are also talking about just violent crime in general. Just the number of folks that, and what we are seeing more and more is just simply no communication or life skills to solve a problem. And that problem is solved by violence, which we are now seeing escalate to firearms. One thing that's really important to know is that we don't watch this problem go by and not do anything about it. The DA brought it up. Very often now, morning by morning, when I read the daily logs or the nightly logs, I see that we pulled a gun. I see that a gun was recovered. I see that a gun was seized. To the number of, I asked for this number a few weeks ago and I can't remember exactly, but I know we took somewhere in the neighborhood of upwards of 300 guns off the street last year. 300 guns from various neighborhoods off the street. So law enforcement is doing something about this. The problem is that this goes way beyond law enforcement alone being reactive to a problem. This gets to where the chief is now starting to talk about mentorship, because if we really want to get to accountability, we've got to get to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is back to our destabilization amongst these groups that are resulting in violence that we are then reacting to. So we have to find better ways to get in and have a conversation with them. And I say them because it's very broad right now, but them, where are we going to find those folks and who can we partner with that has lived life experience? Because I've learned one thing in law enforcement very, very well, and that's that life experience means something totally different than when I come to you without life experience and tell you that I understand your problems. I understand why you are destabilized. I understand about how your upbringing has brought you to where you are today. I don't understand. And I can't tell people I understand, because if I tell them I do, I push them out the door and they no longer want to talk to me. We know behavioral change occurs, but to get to influence persuasion, you've got to have rapport. That's where the community can help us right now. That's where finding lived experience. I go back to the LEAD program and the LEAD navigators and what they are able to do simply because they have lived experience. And it's a totally separate and different conversation than one of my folks trying to walk in and say, hey, I really want to help you change. But through those partnerships, what we have is the ability to expand that rapport. Because when my deputies go walk with my lead navigators and we walk into that same environment, the conversation of rapport happens through livability. But since my deputy is standing there and says, hey, I want to help you. What can we do to help you? I'm not here to arrest you. Accountability is still something we need to involve. I'm not here to arrest you. I'm here to solve the problem. These are the type of things we have been doing that we have to continue to do and apply now to gun violence. We know we have models that work. We just have to take this and move this on to the gun violence, sort of that space. And we need to lean into that space with the same type of resources. And that's where we're continuing to get the community engagement. I love what the chief did with the last meeting, and the question came up about you're trying to engage the Hispanic, the Latino community, yet you're speaking in English. Absolutely. It's a fine point. That's a great point. And we can do and have the same meeting, just reverse it. And we can primarily run that meeting in Spanish. And now again, when we talk about sort of the equitability, of the whole thing, yeah, we understand better, and understand becomes a strong term, but we can more relate to some of the challenges that are going on. But if we can't communicate the message, and we can't effectively build these relationships and build this rapport, then we're not going to solve the problem. And we've seen it in these other arenas. So there's some very good things that are happening. We need some more data to drive this. We will continue to do it. We are all committed to what this looks like. We need the same commitment from the community into what this looks like, but you have to know what you're committing to. What is it that you're committing to? And that's where the why really comes into ensuring that everyone understands what we're doing. So my 4 words: collaboration, safety, stabilization, and accountability. I know, I can't talk anymore. Stabilization and accountability all play into that livability. That's what we're trying to do here. And we're just kind of asking for the community's help. I guess we're not just kind of asking, we're absolutely asking for the community's help in what that looks like, because we don't have all the answers, but some of you do. And we need that lived experience and those other pieces to come into play.
It's always hard to bat cleanup with this.
Well, we're running early,
Well,
so you've got plenty of time.
well, I don't want to take plenty of time, because I'll say a few things, because I know I want to get to the questions, because that's really what this group, I want to hear what this group wants to talk about, not just simply talk about what's on my mind or my list. But it's amazing for me personally to always be in a group with public safety professionals, like my colleagues here, who are amazingly committed to the mission of public safety and keeping this community safe. I learned so much, and you know, what Chief Womack and his team did with this study is incredibly important. It's incredibly important in gathering this data so people can look at it, confront it, question it, dive into it to understand the current snapshot of where we are in this. So I truly appreciate that. I appreciate the mayor bringing the questions up in public forum. I know there's challenges to it. There's questions about it, but I appreciate it being brought up. I appreciate this forum of community leaders asking the questions, wanting to know information. I always appreciate Paige, and I learned so much, and I always have in the decades that we've known each other and done this mission. And Sheriff Hunter, I learn a lot from you every day. The more and more I get to know you, I value the information you bring. My perspective, you know, I started in the last century. Paige and I each kind of have a riff on that. September 23rd, 1999, I sat down with John Fisher, who was a DA at this time, and I asked him, how much does this job pay? He said, I don't care because I need work, you know, and I want to do this job. And I took a walk around a little bit. I went to work for the City of Salem as their litigator, defending police officers who were being sued. And I really learned about law enforcement, public safety from a different perspective doing that. And that made me a better prosecutor, really getting it about what officers do and the pressures they face. Then I went to the parole board as their chair and understood violent crime from a whole different perspective and victims and what they go through from a whole different perspective. Made me a better prosecutor. But really, I boil it down to what motivates me, and I think to bring it around this topic is, and I know this applies, I think, to everyone at this table, the mission is to keep people safe. My family moved here in 1978. Single mom, drove up here in a little Datsun, if you remember that brand. Me, my little sister, a dog and a cat driving up from Pasadena to start a new life. Part of it's because my mom, and I was in 6th grade, so it's, you know, this is what I remember. She felt that the neighborhood and the schools were changing and they were becoming a little more dangerous. And she wanted to find a place that was safer. And she got a job here in Salem was safer. And that's never left me because that doesn't change. Everyone here, whoever they are, want to live, have a business, go to school, raise a family in a place that feels safe. And as I live in West Salem. As I walk around the neighborhood, just the other night, I watch other people walking around the neighborhood. Is it safe? Am I doing my job to make a place that is safe where people can walk their dog, walk with their kids, go to the ball game, the football game? You know, is it safe to put their kids in West High? You know, at Straub, you know, is that feeling of safety and community still there? And that really motivates me, and it flows to a lot of other decisions, but that's the fundamental bottom line. And you know, as Paige said, I didn't get much sleep last night because one, I'm on call this week, and in our office, we all switch the on-call phone around. So after hours, we get a call from police. We either answer it to answer a question, or we go out on scene. I went out on scene last night to a gunshot. Ultimately, we're still looking at what it is, whether it's a suicide or a homicide. It's probably the needle's moving to suicide. I was way out in Paradale Road with the deputies on there. Beautiful location. And there was a tragedy there. A person died alone. Still trying to figure out why. We often know how it happened, why it happened, and who did it. It's the whys sometimes that we have a harder time getting to. Chief Womack brought up the situation. If you saw me out in the parking lot, I was stripping out of my duty jacket and a warmer jacket under that to put this on. There's a tragedy that happened out in the park this morning, and we're still trying to figure out that. You have a great team of people that always show up. There are multiple men from Chief Womack's team out, men and women from Chief Womack's team out there doing the science behind it, the detection behind it, and that always happens, whether it's an officer involved shooting, whether it was the incident last night, multiple folks show up. I think the question that I always ask about is who was there beforehand? Who was there on the prevention side? And that is what in Polk County, and we don't have the incidents that you have in Marion County. We don't have the numbers, thank goodness. That we have, but the question is, tragedy doesn't wait for studies. No, I've been to these meetings, a couple of them, and I've talked to the chief about, and I've read the paperwork that's come out. And yeah, it seemed to be zeroing in on Northeast Salem and Central. I know the numbers are there, but then something happened in South Salem, right down the street where I grew up. I went to South High. And so, nothing will follow course. Nothing is predictable. I was prepared to come here and say, well, we've been fortunate, but our time is coming. I got one last night, right before I went to bed. I got one at 5 a.m. when I got up. And so nothing follows course because these things are tragic. They're unpredictable. But what the data that Chief Womack's team with his experts put together is there are some things that numbers can say and you can look at and learn from, which is primarily these things happen among people that know each other. I mean, the scary, the frightening, stranger on stranger, very infrequent. And I think that's what really is frightening when you see it in the media. That's such as like, oh my God, what can I do to prevent it? And those are so infrequent compared to when you have gun violence or any violence, whether it's gun violence, which I know we're focused on, versus violence between people of another kind, whether it's another type of weapon or it's just hand-on-hand type of thing. That is far more frequent. And so that's what I look at and what we see, for example, among domestic partners, intimate partner violence, far more frequent. When you have interfamily things going on, that a weapon is picked up, far more frequent. What we see in our juvenile population is a rise in mental health situations involving youth. So these are the things we really are diving into, and I think everyone is how can we be involved from the beginning so it doesn't devolve into someone picking up a weapon to basically try and end it. And that is where we put our resources into how the prevention side, how can we be involved there? And let me tell you, that is where there are great teams. There are great teams within each of our counties trying to work with that in terms of preventing people, catching that, behavioral health, the juvenile departments, working with at-risk folks. I wanted to say populations, but I didn't mean that word because when we use these words, I think there's a bias in the thought that comes up. I mean, it's basically all the folks who may be at risk, struggles through stress. So how do we basically prevent a gun or another type of weapon being used to basically resolve a crisis? And I think that's what we're working at, and that's what we have in Polk County through our juvenile department, through a very well, there can always be more, but a very aware behavioral health department and also law enforcement. And that's where I come back to law enforcement is very, very engaged, not simply as some people say, arresting, locking up, being very involved in intercepting, engaging with folks who may be at risk that they come into contact with. So that's why I too am very, very hopeful at the end of it. And I'm grateful for Chief Womack and his team in bringing up these numbers, but it's not the first time. I recall these conversations years ago with my chiefs and other folks saying, do we have a gang issue in Polk County? It's not the first time we've talked about it. And if we do, what can we do about it? How can we engage? Because even though we may not have the same type of situation that Marion County is coming up in statistics, I know based on anecdotal information, many folks who identify as gang involved have families that live in Monmouth and Independence and West Salem and Dallas. So to the extent that we all have folks who identify in gangs, they're everywhere. And we try to engage and prevent situations that happen. So again, my mission is to keep people safe at the bottom, and I can get into the complexities of that. But the question I have is, what do I do with my team to keep people safe? And that's being involved in talking about it, being open about it, and doing everything we can. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here to answer questions about that. Thank you.
Do we all feel warm and fuzzy now?
It's uplifting.
Tom has a question.
So, if that's okay. Chief, there was a program 3 years ago in our community called No Meth Not in Our Neighborhood that became a real galvanizing time for our community because it didn't matter if you're a business, you're a resident. Do we see that something of that magnitude would come forward, like a modernized neighborhood watch or something that really could galvanize the community around something that we could actually visually show our support for? And the real dominant image of No Meth in Our Neighborhood was kind of this line through it and meth right in the middle. And by all accounts, it was pretty effective in raising awareness and galvanizing the community. Are there any plans in the work that maybe you and the mayor or maybe this larger group is working on towards that effect?
Well, we have a scheduled set of meetings coming up this year where we're going to pull people together and we're going to present this information and we're going to gather community input. We're going to synthesize it into a report. So that's exactly what I'm trying to come up with and identify. So I don't have an idea in my brain what that looks like because we need community. We need Salem to tell us what that looks like. That's how I'm approaching it. But yeah, I think in the end, we want some strategy in place that we all identify and coalesce around and we all support. That's what we're trying to build right now. So that's the kind of input that we would hear from a community during a meeting. We would capture that information. And so that's a good idea. What do you mean more about that? Tell me about that. And we would use that to try to figure out how do we apply that to a violent crime strategy. So no, I don't have that in my mind right now exactly, but that's the idea of trying to gather input from our community so we can build that together.
We're really trying to grow something organically from the community. And so if that's the result, which I think it's certainly a possibility, then that's great. But we don't want it to be like, okay, here's the solution. We want you to all buy in. We want to develop the solution together.
If the business community was a big part of that, and I would just, I have not done this by my board of directors. I have one of them sitting next to me, but I mean, this was as part of that effort, the business community took on a lot of the expenses of that and printing and sticker making. I can comfortably tell you the Salem Chamber can rally our members to create whatever you need there. So let's take those barriers away from work. Like if the city's like, boy, we just can't fund this big of a community effort, I think you have some partners who would be willing to come to the table to help.
Yeah, that's an excellent idea. That's exactly what we're talking about. Leveraging a partnership to take on a piece of this strategy. That's exactly right. One thing we're doing as a city, we're not flush with cash. We're hurting actually. So we funded a temporary position. You might have heard this a little bit, but just some salary savings, right? A 2-year position, because I don't have the capacity. You almost do need some person to help coordinate this effort. I can't do that myself. I don't have the staff to do that. And so just to have the conversations and try to coordinate some sort of community-wide strategy, you need a person to help coordinate that. So we funded temporarily just for 2 years this position out of the city manager's office. We're kind of working to try to recruit the right person for that now so that they could help, get me off of this coordination piece a little bit. We have our law enforcement stuff to do and start coordinating this community conversation. So it's another piece I think will help kind of develop that idea and all the component parts to centralize a coordination piece out of the city manager's office. So that's still in the works also. But yeah, I think that would be a huge piece if the business community came around, kind of the marketing and information piece of a strategy that would be incredibly valuable. So thank you for offering that up. And we're capturing it.
So much politics and we know we're in election season. There are just some things that can unite the community where we all, no matter where we stand on things, look at each other and go, yep, we're in on that. We're in on that.
That's the way I feel about shootings too. If there's anything should unite a community. So as a police chief, my top priority is the physical well-being of residents in the community, right? Every crime is important, but there definitely in my mind is a priority, and it's around violent crime, especially when shot or stabbed or killed. That has to be my priority as the public safety leader. So yes, I think there are certain things that should bring the community together, regardless of your ideological views on whatever. And physical safety of community members should be one of them, I think. So I agree.
One of the comments that the facilitator, Ben McBride, said at the last meeting was that focusing on how important focusing on the data is. And that in his experience working with so many cities that he's worked with, as soon as that city focuses on this other great idea that doesn't follow the data, all of those violence numbers start to rise again instead of dropping like they did. So I am very much looking forward to sitting down with the data and some idea people and figuring out how do we address these exact problems with these statistics and this data. And so getting people to these meetings and getting more people in the room and more people around this conversation, I think, is where a lot of us are going next and focused next. So if we can even get more of these flyers and put them up in our businesses and take them to the local businesses, both in English and Spanish, that would be amazing.
So printing costs you can help with. So we're distributing that electronically right now. So it's available on our website. Look at our transparency portal, which is a fancy word for a website, but we have a community violence reduction initiative website now. We're updating everything. There's a video of our kickoff meeting. If you want to watch the kickoff meeting, there's all the advertisements for meetings and everything there. You can print those, you can share those. So yeah, and Angie Hedrick is the primary contact for all that with Salem PD. So if you need any of that material, just reach out to Angie and we'll help. We appreciate sharing any of that information.
And all of you in this room as members of the Business Advocacy Committee actually received those 3 meeting notices on your email from last week. And so we want to make sure you select at least one of those to be in attendance.
I think TJ has a question.
How do you keep the conversation around the issue and not have it turn into a debate on the Second Amendment?
Exactly. Well, somebody stood up so all voices are welcome. That's what I'm trying to say. If there's anything that brings people together, I don't care what your view is on anything. You don't want people to get shot in your community. So I want all voices to be at the table. So someone stood up at both meetings I've had so far. Someone stood up and asked me about Second Amendment issues. And as soon as you say the word gun violence, it's politicized. Even the term gun violence. I try not to say it anymore. I say shootings. We're talking about shootings. So there's these trigger words that people have that pull them to a certain thinking. And I want nothing to do with that. I'm talking about people's safety in the community. And so twice people have stood up at each meeting and said, Second Amendment issues. And I said, come to the meeting, sit down with us, have a facilitated conversation. What's your perspective? What's your concern? Let's talk about it. How can we incorporate that into our strategy? So that stuff doesn't concern me. It's more about, that's why it's so important, Lori, what you said is the data. You always can point back to the data, whatever this, okay, I hear your perspective. How does that apply to young men, 18 to 34, mostly Hispanic that live in Northeast Salem? How do we apply that to that situation? So that's how I think we should facilitate the conversation. Stay focused on the data. It's screaming at us, actually. Very, very screaming at us about what we need to focus on. Again, shootings, like Aaron said, shootings are happening all over the city. I'm not denying that. But if you have limited resources, you can't be everywhere all the time, and you're trying to solve a problem, then you should at least focus on where the biggest bang for your buck is, pun intended, right? So you want to focus on the data, right? So I think data helps you to deal with people with different perspectives, and you incorporate their voices into a strategy that's focused on the data.
I can add to that too. I will tell you that over the years when I've prosecuted gun cases, right, where a gun, the unlawful possession of the gun is the issue.
Illegal guns, yes.
Illegal guns. When I pick a jury for that, I actually want people with concealed carry permits on my jury, because I will tell you, there is nobody that hates illegal use of firearms more than legal users of firearms. And so I actually think that those voices are helpful in this conversation, because really responsible gun owners and users do not want what is going on that we're talking about here today. So I actually find that very helpful. Like you said, can derail a conversation, but I think when you go to actually what our problem is, it's that illegal use, unlawful use. That is our focus, and I find that very helpful, actually.
Budget committee meeting for the city of Salem, and had a person get up and say, how much money are we spending on the toys for cops? And I was like, what do you mean toys for cops?
Yeah.
Things that keep them safe and protect them.
Right.
There's also that mentality that's out there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
So sorry, just real quick. Let's take the alternate side of the spectrum, for example. Let's say another concern that I hear is that we're calling out data that's going to over police certain areas of our community, and it's going to be overrepresented with Hispanics, with law enforcement. Valid perspective and concern too. But let's focus on the data. It's about it lowering risk, right? And I'm even saying this isn't about law enforcement. I'm not saying I want to go out and arrest Hispanic people because they represent 51% of our shootings. I'm saying folks are at highest risk. Let's identify who they are. Let's come together as a community and lower that risk without using law enforcement. That's the best solution. And so again, there's these different extremes and perspectives that sometimes become loud and can throw us off topic when we should stay focused on the data and come together as a community and welcome all those voices as part of the conversation.
Yeah, TJ, that's exactly, I mean, and Paige is right. There was no one, I've had the same experience in juries. I had one just a few months ago that there was no juror I wanted more than a person, a Second Amendment advocate who was in favor of safe, legal gun use. They know it. They don't want people who are using guns illegally and to commit crimes because it tarnishes every effort that Second Amendment advocates and safe legal gun users are doing in our communities. And so that's what I want advocating for something like this. And also the chief is saying, I think folks who are concerned about having better infrastructure in the communities are the ones who want more law enforcement. I think I just want to hear about how can we make that work for you in your community? What does that mean to you? People who bring concerns up about what you said, Chief, have a preconceived bias about it. I just want to hear about what does it mean to you to bring in the infrastructure of public safety into your community?
Oh, I'm gonna tag on that. Sorry. I'm being quiet. I'm gonna tag on the end of that. This is also for us to, and I don't like the word, but I want to say control the conversation because we're not talking about Second Amendment rights. But I get it because arousal brings you into these because it is a safety issue. And all of a sudden we want to change the direction and have a conversation about, I'm trying to take your guns, or now you're going to come take my guns or something. That's not the conversation we're having. But what we need to be very careful of is subjectively engaging into that, because we're frustrated that you're talking about Second Amendment rights and we're not. And what we need to be able to do is objectively look at that person, hear what they have to say, and then change the narrative of that. Because that same person, if we shut them down or push them in a different direction, they're going to go tell their friends. And so now we're just really exacerbating the problem, as opposed to, we're not having a Second Amendment rights conversation. We're having a conversation about kids killing kids. We're having a conversation about people not being able to solve problems without violence. That's the conversation we're having. The Second Amendment rights conversation, totally separate conversation, totally separate day. And so we have to be able to control that narrative and also ensure that we're having these type of conversations where you all are then helping us control that narrative with the rest of the community, because people they hear the word gun and all of a sudden it means that, and really, I'm sorry, the sheriff is coming to your house to come take all the guns out of your house because you can no longer have them. And I'm going to need all your magazines and everything else that you have that your father whittled 25 years ago, whatever it might be. I can tell you all the sheriff's not coming to your house. Any point to take any of those items away from you. And so we just need to focus on the actual conversation that we're having.
Jane?
Yeah, so in 2019, due to budget constraints, we lost our gang enforcement. And since 2019, we've just seemed to have seen the shootings go up. I think in this report, it says 50%. I think the median researchers, even if it could be as high as 80%. But that's the estimated anywhere between 80 and 85%. So knowing that's the case, what are we lacking now that we missed that we've lost that gang enforcement unit due to budget constraints? What are we missing? What do they do that we aren't?
Budget constraints was part of it, but so I came up from California, right? In California, there's a gang enhancement that's a crime. There's a crime. It's not here in Oregon. So in California, there's actually a law in the books where you can validate gang members based on certain criteria. If they commit a shooting, you can actually get an enhanced crime. So you can actually lawfully gather that intelligence on documenting gang members. And you can use it because it's criminal behavior that doesn't exist in Oregon. And so when you talk about documenting or identifying gang members, it's much different in Oregon. It's not illegal to be a gang member in Oregon. It's illegal to shoot somebody, but it's not illegal just to be a gang member. And so that's part of the budget, but it's also the part of what's the purpose of a gang unit. What do they actually do? If you call them the gang unit and you assign 2 officers and all they're supposed to do is go out and document gang members, there's no way to lawfully do that in Oregon. What's really the purpose of gang enforcement team? People are hung up on that name. That team went away. That's not the conversation we should be having. I do need officers and detectives focused on this data to reduce risk, whoever people are, regardless of gang membership or not, based on criminal behaviors, right? It's the only type of criminal intelligence we can actually keep. It's not even lawful for us to keep criminal intel. It's not criminal intelligence. We can't keep intelligence on gang members. So it's a nuanced conversation. We got to be very real about this. I need resources. I'm suggesting that I need a sergeant and 4 or 5 officers dedicated to gun crimes and shootings only. I'm not going to call it a gang enforcement team because that's not what they do. They're focused on shootings and guns and stopping it and lowering risk for people most likely involved. So I'm trying to have that very nuanced conversation. A lot of times it does get stuck on that buzzword of you cut your gang unit and look what's happened. It's not that necessarily, right? So the fact that we don't have enough resources is important. The fact that I have the same number of cops I did since 2018 is important. And if we're focusing on this problem, what I need is a team that will, for example, respond to every non-fatal shooting like it was a homicide. So you have homicide detectives, right? They're called at 2 o'clock in the morning to come out, they solve the case. We need that for every single non-fatal shooting too. It's only a matter of 2 inches, for example, between a non-fatal or a homicide, right? We should treat them all the same. We need resources to do that. We should elevate gun crime and shootings to the same level as the way we treat murders in our community, and we should dedicate the resources to it. So I do need resources at some point in the future. If a measure comes to this community to fund more public safety resources, that's the kind of resources I need so I can create a team that's focused on this work. I don't have that right now. I have a homicide team. I have another team that's kind of focused on some drug enforcement and some other things, but it's just so watered down because of our limited resources. I need a dedicated focused team. That team could also connect with whatever sort of community-based intervention strategies we develop. That team of experts that's focused on this kind of crime can be that liaison with that community-based resource so that we kind of line up our strategies. So there is a certain amount of police resources that we need to do this. You're hearing from your police chief right now. I do need resources to make this happen. So I'm not doing this because I'm trying to justify money for police resources. I started this conversation 3 years ago before we were talking about budget cuts. But there is a correlation there between the need for police resources and the crime that we're talking about here. It's not a gang enforcement team of officers. I would call it a CVRI team, Community Violence Reduction Initiative team, right? Because it's focused on this type of work.
Chris.
One of the most, I guess, striking numbers from this data is nearly 70% had a prior history. How significant is that to you in helping to resolve this? And is that 70% also represent victims too?
I don't know that 70% between the victims and suspects. I'm not sure that.
It's both, either as a victim or a suspect. We looked at both categories and of the victims and the suspects. So it's a lot of times we're talking about the same people, right? If you're at high risk for shooting somebody, you're also at high risk for being shot. So a lot of times the folks are in the same categories of risk, actually, whether you're a victim or a suspect. So yeah, a lot of victims and a lot of suspects have criminal histories. It is broken out in more detail in the full report. This is just a snapshot, so I can't remember off the top of my head. A little bit of difference there, but both as victims and suspects, a lot of prior. They weren't strangers to the criminal justice system.
Address that just a little bit. We actually just had this conversation. It's kind of ongoing right now, and it gets back to the word I talked about, which was stabilization. So we know that we have folks, and we know that when they are on supervision, their recidivating rate, because I got to get that word right, is lower when they're on supervision. But what we're finding very quickly is that when they come off supervision, this is when we start to see trends, right? Because there is some sort of stability in their lives. When they're on supervision, they have to do certain things. They're responsible for their actions. They're accountable, where when they come off supervision, they're not. And this is something that outside of, we can just look at gun violence, we can just look at this. But again, you got to get to the root of why this is occurring in the community. And that's where we get to these terms. So we were just having this conversation about how are we teaching these life skills? We've got some great community partners that are very good at this jail to community. And what does that look like? Teaching basic life skills, basic life management skills, basic conflict management skills. That is where we can do better. I will echo what the chief is saying, though. It costs money, it costs dollars, it costs resources to put these into play. And when you look at it, what we need to have is better data. And one place that we know we have very poor data is in community corrections. That's not my fault. And I'm not going to make the next statement because of my commissioners, but it's the state's fault. So every single year for the past about 20, 25 years, it has been asked of the state to improve the data collection system, because the data collection system in community corrections, if I tell you it's antiquated and archaic, I'm actually lying, because it's worse than that. And so it's not actually capturing the data that you all want to see and the data that we need to be able to track what is happening. Where is this chasm occurring that you're coming off supervision and doing quite well, and then 6 months later, you're back in the system. You have now recidivated and you're back in the system. What's happening in between? We need some of these data numbers to be able to do that. But this is where we're going to have to probably go after the legislature to actually go after the state and say, you have to do this. You can't just keep cutting this out of the budget and not updating this data system, because it's affecting the entire state. So we know on your first one, we have to do better. I have to do better when they leave my services of community corrections. What are we doing for them, and have we prepared them, stabilize them to re-enter the community? And do they have a resource network still available if they need it? Those are the questions we need to be able to answer, but we also need that data to tell us, hey, this is where we're missing the boat and we need to get better.
Can I follow up?
Quick, because Rich has a question.
So how does that rate, or that 70%, how does that compare to other communities? Like, is that good? I mean, I don't know.
Does it sound good to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
What does it mean, really? I mean, these are sort of, amorphous terms. Okay, they're changing the statistic and changing the expectation. What does it truly mean? To not recidivate, or are we capturing everyone? Recidivate at what? And is the ultimate and this is where we get into a whole other conversation that gets more complicated, basically. Data collection is one thing, but it's also, is the sanction appropriate? Is the resolution appropriate for the person that's done? And that gets more complicated as well. I mean, your initial premise, they have a criminal history of what? Is it property crimes? Is it violent crimes? Is it this and that sort of thing? You ask a very good question. I always come back with the so what, which is not to criticize you, but is ultimately putting them on supervision the correct thing, or should they have been incarcerated longer? And these are these are the variables. And simply having a criminal history does not necessarily indicate you're going to commit violent crime. Having no criminal history doesn't indicate. I mean, it just means you haven't been caught. All these sorts of things. We don't know. I can say is that my opinion is that the resources for supervision have steadily eroded from the state. And I think the sheriff and the mayor, based on his prior lifetime, can talk about that. If you don't give resources for supervision and cut down, and then even exclude who's even going to be on the supervision, basically there's very little you can do other than putting people back in the community, which I don't think is a good deal either. That's where the complexity comes. Sorry, I don't mean just talk to you, sir, but I'm saying it is complicated and but a fascinating conversation.
So something that we haven't talked about, obviously the numbers are showing this, is that I don't hear any comment about the effect of taking safety officers out of the schools. I'd like to hear your perspective on that. Even if we were to, as a business community, tell the schools they need to fund the officer. I'm not saying that, that needs to be budget, but I'm seeing a lot of money invested in very unique programs that I don't see results happening in the schools in lieu of safety officers. And so I just like the perspective on that.
I don't think, I'm sure I don't think that this data tells us, again, causation, right? I don't think we can draw those, again, if you're a statistician, I don't think we can draw those conclusions. But it's funny that you say that, Rich, because I actually listed that as one of the answers to another question. I think if there's a positive from the ballot measure 110 experiment, right? And again, I'm trying to take a positive out of it. I think that was a failed experiment, but I'll tell you what we learned. Removing law enforcement from potential solutions is bad for our communities. I really do think we are not the only solution. We cannot be the only solution because we are very back end oriented. But We are part of the solution. And ballot measure 110, when you took cops out of the equation of can we manage illegal substances in our community, had disastrous effects. I was not supportive, right, of taking SROs out of schools. I'm still not. I said at the time, I still think I have children. I still think it's important. I will say from the ballot measure 110 lesson, I think we have learned that we need to be part of the solution. And whether SROs are all of the solution, I don't think any of us can draw that causal connection. But law enforcement needs to be engaged at every point of the process. And if you take law enforcement out of the equation, you lose all connectivity. You lose, for lack of a better word, some intelligence, right, of what is going on in our community at that really ground level. And I think that's another good example of where we need to be. And you know, that decision is above Chief Womack. It's above me. Those are decisions made elsewhere. But I think law enforcement being part of the conversation and part of the solution needs to happen at all of those levels. And so I think that's part of it.
We lose our ability to influence behavioral change.
Absolutely.
That we talked about that rapport. And that's what we're losing in different parts of the community, not just in schools.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I know that. Can you ask the question like 30 seconds?
Yeah.
Okay, go.
I said mine so fast because I saw Tom get up.
Click.
So we know that the bulk of the crime and shootings are happening in the northeast Salem area. A lot of the preventative care that happens is solely located in that area. Is any of that data that you're seeing counting the visitors per place? Being a previous visitor, I know I was held at gunpoint. I was in homes with guns pointing at me, not necessarily being held, but making me aware that guns were in the equation. So is that factoring in that people that are doing the preventative work are also being held in violence situations?
We analyzed 5 years worth of shootings and we took a deep dive on each case. Yeah. So now this community conversation we're having is trying to capture those perspectives on which resources are there, which stakeholders are there, how they might plug into a strategy. That's the best way I can answer that. It's we are trying to capture all those voices and experiences and figure how can we direct those into some positive community-based prevention and intervention efforts for us to come alongside us.
Because
Yeah, it's 30 seconds, Corey.
because this type of mindset is not something you can really teach. I engage people to just speak up, because really when you see something, you should say something. That's the message I.
Community forums. Need you.
Yes,
For sure.
Thank you to my friends
Be
up
there.
here. Appreciate it.
Yeah, a couple announcements as we close. First of all, Angela, thank you so much for hosting us. You know, out of the 6 people in front of you, 4 are elected. 1 is our facilitator and 1 is a volunteer. I think we should recognize this group for their great work. Make the group aware, we've got to do our selfless plug here. On Monday, our forum speaker series luncheon is going to be our city council candidates. And so it's going to be a great opportunity. Ironically, in our race for Ward 1, both candidates are traveling. So when you see Paul, he can wave in the back of the room. Or if you see Celine Coleman, give them a wave. We will not hear from them, but they're all captured in our candidates questionnaire, but really need you to be 11:30 to 1 at the Salem Convention Center. Thank you to our partners for making that happen, and all season long, our team at Hagen Hamilton Insurance Solutions. So with that, thank you all for your time this morning. All of you for